It's very strange to be talked about in a language you don't understand. Miriam, I assume that you said pleasant things, but who knows? Okay, thanks for coming. I'm very happy to be here at the Gotland Game Conference. My name is Bonnie. This talk is called Reading Video Games Like Literature. Originally it was called Shakespeare, the First-Person Shooter, but Ulf vetoed that, I think. It was a little too flashy and not particularly accurate. So now you have this title for a talk that sounds much more like a textbook, though admittedly that's a textbook I'd be pretty excited to buy. Let's see, how far am I from this microphone? Does that sound about right? That's okay? Okay. So I should also say that there's going to be a Q&A at the end. At the same time, if you have small questions or clarifications you want along the way, please raise your hand. We're not actually that large a group, so I'll try and answer you as you go along. Don't let me hear the sound of my own voice for 45 minutes, please. So before I explain to you who I am or why I'm talking to you, I want to show you something that should look familiar. This is Mario. Specifically, this is Mario from Mario 64 in 1996. Mario is a character you all know, but he's also an icon. So over the years, he's come to stand for Mario games, for games in general. For some people, this is just the icon that represents gaming. And he works as an icon because he's very simple, right? He's sort of friendly and straightforward. But if we think about this icon, we think about this image and all the details that we miss whenever we just see him as Mario, we start to see a lot of interesting things. So I want to take a step back from this icon that we know and see what happens if we read this image. So not just see it, but read it. And we're going to start to see lots of tiny bits of visual information that make up the character design that we take for granted. Okay, so let's pretend this is a page in a book, and we're marking it up the way that we would mark up a book. What details might we see? I should also say, if we were an even smaller group, I would ask you what details you see, but you'll have to bear with the things that I see. Okay, so just a list of things, right? There is an M on Mario's hat. He carries around his name on his forehead at all times. Interesting. He wears red, bright colors, bold colors. He's pudgy, right? And you can see that this is important to the character designer because his pudge has been rendered so carefully in the polygons. You can see those perfect little rolls of fat in his polygons. He has blue eyes. He also has red sideburns, which would seem to be contrary to him being so stereotypically Italian. He has a mustache. His mustache takes up nearly a third of his face. It's got flair. There's almost nothing else on him that has that kind of flair. He's wearing gloves. You can't see his fingers. You can see this is just a list of all the details you can start to notice. And they're not the gloves that you would expect a plumber to be wearing, these sort of rubber yellow gloves. They're actually really pristine white gloves. You can't see any of his skin besides his face. He's got this squat stance that makes him seem very cute and comic, but not actually really like an action figure. His bodily proportions, he's not realistic. His head takes up a third of his body. His gender, right, he is male. This seems like an obvious statement, although I like thinking about his gender queerness if we look at his kind of feminine curves going on in there. And his ethnicity and his race, right, he's white. And so this list of details can go on and on. By examining Mario so closely, we've started the process of what we would call in the literary world close reading. So taking something, even something fun, like Mario, and delving into it in really close detail. What do any of these details mean? That's what we would ask when we were reading a book, right? What does any of this mean? I'm not going to answer that for you, at least not in this little demonstration. The point that I want to make is that that's kind of the fun part. There are any number of things that you could make out of any one of these details. There's a whole article you could write about Mario's roll of pudge there in the middle, his roll of fat. I think that would be a really fun article to write. Okay, so why are we doing this? Who am I? Why are you listening to me? So I'm a literature PhD student. I am getting my PhD from Berkeley. That is near San Francisco. That means that I read and teach and write about books all day, every single day. In particular, I study books that are written in French and English that have to do with surrealism and sexuality. But I also study new media, so that means that I take the skills that I have for books and I apply them to higher tech things like fan fiction, cybersex, video games. In short, I am a professional nerd. I'm a games journalist. Kind of. That's what I used to do full-time before I went back for my PhD. I wrote mostly about gender and sexuality in games for publications like The Village Voice and The Economist and Wired. Some of you may have been here for the talk that I gave in December on LGBT issues in games, so you know that I'm a particularly sex-obsessed games journalist. I love to read non-traditional media too closely. So in academia, in the world of studying literature, we have this system that we get taught for reading texts really closely and finding really interesting details. What I want to do is turn that lens onto other media, onto video games, things that people don't think are academic. At the moment, close reading games, even at Berkeley, which is pretty non-traditional, that's really unheard of. And I don't want to read a little bit closely. I want to get way too close. I don't mind pissing people off. This is surprisingly important for this kind of work. So when I used to write about games on the internet for a living, you get really used to people being mad at you. I would do close readings for places like Joystick or The Escapist or my blog, and I would get hate mail that said, you know, you're ruining games, you're reading too much into them. There were some harsher words mixed in there, I promise. And I actually really don't feel discouraged by this. I feel really encouraged by people cursing at me. Because when you make somebody angry like that, that means that you've hit on something interesting. You've hit a nerve. And I really want to explore why it is that people get quite so mad. Okay. And I want something to change. So, by the way, I decided that it was really cruel to give you slides that were entirely in text. This is a very academic thing to do and not a very tech industry thing to do. So whenever I had no images, you've just gotten unicorns and other mythical creatures. This might be mostly for my entertainment, we'll see. Okay, so what I want to get you to read games like books, kind of. I want to convince you to read your games closely, not just to play them. And I want to get you to read your games creatively and playfully. At the same time, games are not books. That's important, and we'll talk more about that. So I want you to get more out of the games that you play by close reading them. There are tons of details in games, in any game, that we breeze by playing them, right, just for fun. Fun is great. This process should be fun. But when we say just for fun, it cuts out all of these other ways we can see a game. So I want to convince you to go back to the games you already know and see them differently, or to play new games and see them differently, even games that seem really, really simple. So, my own personal agenda, right? To promote games as an art form worthy of analysis. At the moment, this kind of close reading we reserve for things that are high art. Literature, painting, and I want to say that this is not something that has to be just for high art. Games can also be an art form that we can analyze. We might not have a Shakespeare of games right now, Often you'll hear in academia people want to know what the Shakespeare of games is, because it means there's something that they can latch onto and analyze that's really, really good art. Maybe we don't have that yet. But if we start analyzing like we do, then we set a precedent for making more interesting things. I would like to make literature professors relevant. Please help me do that. My degree takes 7 years to get. I have 5 more years left. There may not even be books when I graduate. I do really think that the skills that you learn as a lit professor are really interesting for games. We just need to make the leap to put these things together. And I want your help. So this talk, this idea, this is all a work in progress. And I would love if anybody has suggestions of things to read, things to play, ideas, to shout them out at the end. Come find me over the course of the next few days. You'll see my email again on the last slide. Get in touch with me, talk to me. I would love to hear what you have to say. Okay, so before we can read games like literature, we need to know how we read literature. So we're taught in school. I am American and went through American public school. I assume that you guys are in Sweden too. You're taught in school to respect books, right? You're taught that you open up a book, there's supposed to be something in there that's meaningful to read. You know you're supposed to look for metaphor and simile and all of these things. No one has to convince you that a book is worth analyzing. So we don't just read, we also write about these books. We write essays for school, literature professors do it for a living. Even books that have been around for forever, like Hamlet, get written about again and again and again. So there are thousands of articles and books about Hamlet, and you would think that everything's been said that can be said, but it just keeps going. All of the new details you can find and the creative ways that people come up with things to say about them. So we're not totally in the past at the moment. We read other media this way too. Film studies started up about 30 years ago, and we use film studies to read movies the way that we read books, which is a good model for video games. And so specifically, we close read, and then we build arguments. So we don't just pull apart Mario for the sake of pulling apart Mario, as fun as it is to point at all of his little imperfections. We do it to come up with some sort of interesting argument. And we use those details we get from close reading to build an argument. So let's see what that looks like. Do you recognize this text? Nod emphatically if you recognize this text. Yeah? Okay. So this is a passage from Hamlet. Right? This is the famous to be or not to be soliloquy. And we're going to use it real quick to see what it looks like when we close read normal texts, traditional texts. And you'll see it's kind of a sight to behold, all of the details we pull out. Normally I would ask somebody else to read this and spare my poor Shakespeare rendition. But no one else has a mic, so you're going to have to listen to me. Envision someone with much better acting training, okay? So, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing them end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. Okay, lots of quotable lines in there. So there are hundreds and hundreds of ways that people have read this and published articles about it. And we're going to look at just a couple of them. So the most obvious way that people read this text is that it's about suicide, right? So at this point in the play, Hamlet is trying to convince a group of actors to put on a play that will make his uncle feel so uncomfortable about having killed his father that he'll reveal his own guilt. It's very meta in there. But he's thinking about life and death. And so it would seem that he's thinking about suicide, right? Whether he should exist or not, whether he should end the troubles of life, whether he should die. Okay. Maybe it's about sleep and dreams, actually. So we have all of this sleep imagery. He's thinking about maybe death is like sleep, but then he's not really sure what sleep is like because there are dreams and sleep he doesn't understand. But wait, maybe it's actually about this other thing. Maybe it's about sex, right? This is not just me, even though I am always reading for sex. So, he's talking about arrows and about heartache. That reminds us of love. But he also talks about things like the shocks of the flesh. We have rub, we have come. And all of a sudden, death becomes like a consummation. Okay. Wait. Maybe it's not actually about any of those things. Maybe it's about how metaphor always fails. So Hamlet is trying to understand death by thinking about the things that it could be like. He does sleep, he does sex, but then it's also like a weapon, but it's also like a sea, but it's also kind of like religion, and none of these really work for him. Right? So all of a sudden, we don't really know what this is about anymore. We just know that it's about a lot of things, and a lot of details that we can point to. So this gives you just the basic idea of what it looks like when we close read literature. One of the things that gets said about games a lot is that you can't close read them because you ruin them, right? Like there's something about looking so closely at a game that destroys it. And I think this is a really good counterexample. This is kind of what I want to show all of the trolls that send me hate mail, right? Is that you can take something that is a great work of literature. Shakespeare is not even, it's not what I study, but of course it's Shakespeare, so it's a great work of literature. And you can pull it apart like this, and the original is still there. The original is still great, even though you pick at it. Okay, so why do we do this? And it's not just to sound fancy, although I enjoy that too. Note the unicorns. So we close read to get all the details out of the original that we wouldn't otherwise get. We close read to think through complicated ideas, right? So if you wanted to think about what sleep and death mean, you might go to Hamlet because that's something complicated that you could work through by close reading and writing an essay. We do it so that we can talk back to the works that we love. And this is something I think that's really important for games especially, is that games are about interactivity, and yet they're handed to you and you get to play them and consume them. If you write about them and if you close read them, then you can give your own ideas back again. You can actually engage in a dialogue with the original. And we close read so that we can say things other people haven't said. Right, so all those things I showed you with Hamlet, people have said those before. Maybe I really wanted to write an essay about how Hamlet is about cheese, right? I don't know. There's no cheese I can think of in Hamlet. But if I can pick apart the details and find support, I can write an essay about anything that I want. I can go up against the people who do this for a living because I have the same source material as everyone else. It's a really good excuse for being in your face and kind of arrogant, right? You can say whatever it is you want to say. And I think that that's actually really fun. Okay. Oh, now we're on to narwhals. So, how would we close read games? Right, we know how to read literature now. How do we close read games? I'm going to stop myself because I can hear myself talking and ask if there are any clarifications before I go on, because I'm going to get a drink of water. Think to yourselves. Anybody? No clarification? No? Okay. So, right, so we know how we... That's okay. We know how we read books. So how would we do this for games instead? That, to me, is an interesting question because games are not the same as books. There are some really crucial differences, obviously. So for the most part, the same way we would with books, right? Looking really closely at details. However, we need to remember about interactivity. This is something I find a lot with literature professors who want to talk about games, is that they don't understand that this is an interactive experience. And that has to be part of the way we analyze these games. Don't just treat them like text. Okay. By readjusting our expectations for authorship and intentionality, I'm going to let you think about that while I pour this glass of water, slowly and dramatically. So, oftentimes, the reason that people don't want to look at games this way is that there's no clear author to point to for everything. A lot of games are made by teams. They can be made by quite large teams, depending on what kind of game we're talking about. And there's no Shakespeare, right? There's no one person to point to and say, you know, this sparkle is there because an author put it there. It's also hard to say what the intention was. Games are made, you know, often to make money, understandably, for any number of reasons. You know, if you're looking at a big console release, that's a moneymaker. And so to say that that was made for artistic purposes gets complicated. I guess I want to tell you to forget about those things. Don't worry about who the author is. Don't worry about what the intention was. That could be really interesting, but it holds people up, so don't even worry about it. And of course, stick your tongue out at people who tell you that games aren't serious. This happens to us a lot, right? You tell people what you do. At least I find in America it happens. You tell people what you do, and they say, games aren't serious. How can you make those? How can you study those? We know that's ridiculous, right? So let's not say it to scholars. Okay, so what would we read? So let's say I've sold you, you are really interested in close reading, you feel fascinated, and you want to know what to begin to close read in games. These, to me, are the easy answers. But be careful, because they might be too easy. Okay, things like story, dialogue, cutscenes, games derived from books, cinematic games, artsy games, right? These are the things that if you took a literature professor and told him to rewrite literary criticism for games, they would probably look at a game like BioShock, for example. Right? I adore BioShock. I'm not sure how you feel, but I'm totally sucked in by that. Playing off of books, right? BioShock is inspired by Ayn Rand. I love all the little details, but it's too easy. It's already like close reading a book. We have to do something more unique to games. Okay. Getting harder. So things like character design, graphics, environment design, perspective, sound. One of the examples I love of this kind of close reading, my husband Scott is in the audience and is giving a talk tomorrow. And he did a piece for Joystick once on how Leon Kennedy, who is up there from Resident Evil 4, was a queer hero. Right? And part of that was based off of his outfit, which in some ways seems like picking details, but in some ways I think is a really good example of close reading how we design characters. And you guys, you make games, you think about these things, you know that thinking goes into these things. Okay, so the things that would be really hard to close read, but would be really rewarding. Gameplay and interactivity, rule sets, mechanics, world design, level design, player experience. These are the things that we don't get in literature, right? I sit in a room all day with books and with people studying books, and there's very little interactivity in the way we traditionally see books. So it would be great to bring this stuff into the world of close reading because we don't have it. Okay, so we're gonna try this. So you're gonna see a video. It might look familiar to you, but even if you know it well, try to keep your analysis glasses on, look for details, and since we've been talking about Hamlet, yeah, I don't know, let's try. Let's think about the same things that you were thinking about with Hamlet. I'm gonna let you watch this, and let's see what we come up with. Hopefully our sound is on.
It's me, Mario. Hello.
Toadstool. Peach.
Okay. Did this look familiar? Yeah? Has everyone played Mario 64? No? Yes? Okay. So even if this doesn't look familiar, right, this is Mario 64, this is 1996, but even if this doesn't look familiar, we can start to look at it for details. So if you treat it like it's a text that you come across, and you try and mark it up and put sticky notes into it the way you would mark up a book, you start to see it differently and think about different things you might see. So watching a video is less than ideal, granted, because you're not actually playing the game, but this is what we've got, so we'll work with that. And there are a bunch of different things I notice here, thinking about Hamlet, thinking about close reading, that maybe you notice too. So let's see. Okay, so we're going to go through this in little pieces. So it starts off with the title screen, right? And what do you hear when you see the title screen? Someone can do an impression. I know you can. Right?
No one can tell it. Well, it started off with, it's me, Mario.
Right, exactly. So you hear this proclamation that this is Mario at the same time that this is the title screen for the game. So it's almost like this whole game is about being Mario, which sounds surprisingly like Hamlet's whole to-be issue. You go onto the next screen, right? This is the screen from which you would press start. And we see Mario's head all of a sudden. And it gives us the sense that the entire world we're about to go into is actually contained within Mario's disembodied head. So if we want to play, or if we want to exist, right, like Hamlet is wondering whether or not to exist, we have to decide whether or not to be Mario. But by image 3, right, we've waited too long. Our decision to exist has taken too long, and Mario has started to fall asleep. Sleep being for Hamlet a lot like death. So in opting not to be Mario, we seem to have killed him for Hamlet. You see how it starts to get confusing in here. And when he falls asleep, he dreams. So this is something that will happen in the game, but at the same time, this is a dream that he's having. This is Mario fighting Bowser, right? And this is a dream in which he is defending his own life. So Hamlet was wondering, maybe I could sleep, maybe in sleep I'll be safe. And in Mario's sleep, he's definitely not safe. So what else do we see? So, and you can see how it just goes sort of second to second. So we get to choose which file we'd like to play. Each file is also represented by a picture of Mario's head. Each game is still about being inside Mario. And then we realize that we're not just in a dream, we're in a fantasy, right? This has yet to ever happen to me, that a blonde princess appears in real life and tells me that she's baked me a cake. This strikes me not only as a dream, but as a sort of, adorably stereotypical male fantasy. And then we have this weird meta moment where the camera circles around us and shows us who we are, who the player is. You have to remember, this is one of the first 3D games that came out. And so this is almost a lesson in what it means to play 3D games. But at the same time, it's a self-reflective moment. So it's kind of like Hamlet sitting there thinking about himself. At the same time, the camera comes around to show us ourselves. I love this really quick shot where you see the edge of the world. This is our hub world that Mario comes into. It's got the castle. He'll go to all of his other adventures from there. But in this moment, we see just the very edge of the landscape. And we know that we're in the imagination because the world cuts off. And there's something beyond it, but it's something we can't access. I'm going to show you a couple more. But if anyone is brave and has noticed anything else in these, you're welcome to speak up, too.
I just wanted to mention the exclamation before when they say, "It's not me, Mario."
Yeah.
Because that if they also introduced the characters as Super Mario, but he didn't introduce himself as Super Mario, just regular Mario. So people might wonder, why is it called Super Mario? So what would happen to disease? The shows as well at the beginning.
Yeah. So what do you think? Okay, pointing out details. That's a good place to start. Did anybody else notice anything up until there? I'm going to make you watch it again, so you'll notice more things, don't worry. Okay, so Mario pops out of his pipe. We again have this strange meta moment where we kind of thought we were Mario flying through the air, and all of a sudden we realize we're watching him instead. He goes into Peach's castle, and this dream that we seem to be in turns into a nightmare, right? The player has started being able to control the character at this point, moves forward into the castle, but your control is taken away from you in this moment because you are frozen and you can't move forward, and you're listening to Bowser tell you to leave. So this dream has become a nightmare. You're wandering around the castle. This player knows where he's going. He's going to the first level of the game. But you can see how the inside of the castle is itself like a dream. And then finally the player runs up to this image. This is going to be the first world that he goes into. And this image is great because it's another dream within a dream, right? It would really mess with Hamlet's mind because it's a piece of art that he goes into that's a world, but at the same time, it's a place where when you die, you don't go in there, you pop out of there when you die. It gets very confusing in a way that I think Hamlet would appreciate. Any other small things you want to add to that? Yeah?
It feels like a missed opportunity to not mention the fact that Mario gets shot out of a big green pipe that itself shoots out of the ground.
Yeah.
Considering the beautiful being sexy.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, the thing that that comes up with close reading is that you could close read for anything, right? So this particular version that I'm giving you is trying to tie Mario and Hamlet and blah, blah, blah. But there are tons of other versions you could do. And you'll see, I'll show you in a minute, one of the other articles that I think you could write just from this 2 or 3 minute video is definitely about pipes and what we can do with pipes. But I think that's a really good point. Yeah? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's kind of hard to analyze this without having the history of Mario with the game.
Interesting.
The pipe is existing in the community.
Yeah.
You can analyze it separately, but if you really want to know where this stuff is coming from.
Yeah, I think that's also an argument that gets used a lot in a way against close reading games, right? Which is that everything takes place in a context. Pipes serve a functional purpose in earlier Mario games, so maybe it's not just for the sake of seeing something big and green shoot out of the ground, but I do think that games, once they're out there in the universe, are sort of separate from their context. Their context is important, but the same way that you could pick up a book without knowing the other books around it, it's important to be able to stop and read a game just for what it is, just for what's in front of you. So I think maybe there's 2 different ways of reading there. There's one with context and one without context. If that makes sense. Feel free to fight me on that afterwards. Okay, so if I were to be writing an article from this talk, which I'm not, but let's say I were, I would probably call it something snazzy, right? Like, to press start or not to press start. Mario 64 is a response to Hamlet's dilemma. And you can see that the image I've chosen makes it look like this article has been published in the PMLA. This is the most prestigious literary journal in America. This article has not and will never be published in the PMLA. But you can dream, right? And part of my point is to try and infiltrate academia as it stands. So what would this article be about? It would be about Mario and Hamlet, famous for their own proclamations, actually have a lot to say to each other. Hamlet contemplates death and sleep. Mario plays with it. Hamlet has all of this self-doubt, but Mario has this self-assertion and lets players discover what dreams may come. Mario poses this Hamlet-like identity crisis for players, throwing them into new deaths and new dreams. But ultimately, Mario offers Hamlet a dream of death that still is full of those slings and arrows, right? Those goombas and bombs that he is worried about in Shakespeare. So we see a really interesting play between this game and this work of literature, which I'm almost certain was not written to be in discussion with Hamlet. Mario 64 wasn't created to be about Hamlet. But you can see that we can make an argument out of almost anything. Whether or not you buy this argument is totally yours to say. I'm not sure I 100% buy this argument, right? It's an exercise. So if there's anything that comes to mind and you want to fight back against it, again, I would love to hear it. So as was mentioned over there are lots of other things that you could say about this game. So here are some other essays that you could write about this, just from this 2 or 3 minute video that also don't exist. Mario's gaze, the symbolic role of the camera in 3D gaming, right? Ceci n'est pas un bip. Plumbing in Mario as mixed genital metaphor. In Bowser's House, there are many doors. Religious struggles in Mario 64. And psychoanalyzing Peach's castle, right? So you can see, you could go on and on. There could be hundreds of articles from this 3-minute video. I think we have time to watch it one more time. Do you have patience to watch it one more time? Okay. So, right, we've picked apart all these little details. We've thought about what we could say about it. So now the idea is to watch it again, see if you see those details, and see if you see new details of your own.
It's me, Mario! Hello!
Dear Mario, please come to the castle. I have baked a cake for you. Yours truly, Princess Toadstool. Peach.
Did you see a whole slew of new things you've never seen before in Mario? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Okay, so where do we go from here? If you've accepted that this is how close reading works, this is how we read books, and we should do this for games, what does that mean that we do? So, if you play games, and I assume everyone plays games, overthink them. Don't worry about people telling you that you're reading too much into something. Don't shut up. I often find when I play games and I want to talk about them, people say, just let it go, don't talk about it. Talk about it. This kind of thinking can be really creative and is in that way really contagious. If you make games, and a lot of you guys make games, reward close readers. So give us details that we can find if we look closely. Your play experience obviously should be fun for someone who is playing just for fun, but give us something in reward for reading so closely. If you're in academia, like myself, like some of the people sitting in the front of the room here, analyze games. Right? This goes out to any literature professors that can hear the echoes in the universe, hear my talk from somewhere far away. This shouldn't just be me. There should be lots of people doing this. And use any medium available to you to write about this and to play with analysis. You don't have to write articles for literary journals. You can blog, you can make videos, you can make podcasts, you can make anything you want. Just go into depth. Don't be afraid to sit around and have a good time being a nerd for a couple hours and, write a whole lot about just a tiny little piece of a game. And of course, if you write something or you make something, send it to me, because I would love to see what everybody thinks. If you have thoughts about the video, feel free to come tell me during the event, things that occurred to you, feel free to email me. If you write anything that you feel like fits into this, send it to me, bug me. I would love to hear about it. Thanks so much for listening to me, and now I'm going to let you guys ask questions if you have questions. Clapping works too. Yeah, Mary.
Thank you for a very interesting talk, and especially for elevating games to the Shakespeare level, which I find wonderful. So now you're analyzing Mario. Do you feel that there are other games that would be especially interesting to reference?
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat your question because I know we have some projection issues. So Miriam asked if there are other games besides Mario that are particularly good fit for analyzing. I would say anything, really. I would, in fact, challenge people to take the things that are really good for analyzing and not analyze them. Take the things that are particularly simple or seem childlike or seem, don't actually seem as rich, and find the ways in which they are surprisingly rich. Yeah. 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 Totally. Yeah, so the question seemed to be, a lot of the things that I was talking about are more about forms of narrative, whereas you could do this kind of analysis for mechanics, let's say the mechanics of Monopoly, and pull just as much commentary out of the mechanics. I totally agree. Definitely. Definitely, yeah. So again, just a call for analyzing core mechanics, thinking about how you might analyze core mechanics when you make games as a way to think about making games differently. I totally agree, and I'm really glad you called me on that, because partly because I can't have you guys play anything, I can just have you watch me. What I have to show you is mostly cinematic, narrative, things like that. But you're totally right. We should be talking about mechanics. And you have all these awesome games out on the show floor. So when you play them, think about that. Think about what a particular mechanic might mean. And you have their creators right there. You guys are their creators. So feel free to grill them. Feel free to say, why did you make it like this? Do you know that maybe you could read it this way? And put people on the spot. I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
You said that you should not care about
Yeah. And yet I'm telling you to grill the authors of these games.
No, I'm just, because the way you analyze is kind of like doing it for yourself.
Mm.
But you can also do an analysis that is, how are they trying to engage the user with a certain agenda?
Definitely.
How do you view the different kinds of, and is there a hierarchy in when studying games, or what kind of?
I think that there's a hierarchy of what already exists. So I think there's a lot more people already writing about intentionality. You know, like, why did they design it this way? What does this do for the player experience? How does this relate to other games? And I think that's equally important, but more people are doing it. So I kind of want to create a false hierarchy and say that this is more important. Not that it necessarily is more important, but just to get people to go out and do the kind of work that's not being done already. If that makes sense?
Yeah, and in the literature world, is there a concept that?
Oh, in terms of when you analyze books, the difference between like what the author has to say or like what the author's intentions were, it depends what school you fit into. It's much more old-fashioned in literature to say that, well, the author intended X, Y, and Z, so that's what's important. It's much more contemporary to say, forget about the author. Let's see what the book has to tell us on its own. But it goes in waves, popularity. There's a question somewhere over here. Yeah?
You suggested a couple of times that we should avoid works that have a great deal of built-in, that author intended,
Yeah.
such as BioShock.
Yeah.
And look more at things like Mario. Now, Mario is the Mickey Mouse of the 21st century.
Yeah.
He was constructed by a very large corporation for the purpose of entertaining little kids, and he's a corporate product.
Yeah.
Whereas BioShock, okay, it's a corporate product too, but it's got a lot more depth to it, and Planescape Torment and things like that. And BioShock will never be as popular as Mario.
Yeah.
So were you suggesting that because it's easier, or because you want to stay away from what the author's intention is? Or, personally, I find Mario kind of dull compared to BioShock. But I'm curious about your reasoning.
Well, let me give you a parallel example. So some of the work that I do involves close reading fan fiction /fan fiction in a way that's not about sociology and culture. It's just about close reading those texts. And I'm not saying that Mario is fan fiction in a lot of ways, but that sort of dullness that you feel, I think, really parallels the sense people have that fan fiction isn't necessarily good writing, or that there's something less interesting in it than in literature. And to me, part of the fun is to take something that's counterintuitive, take something that is narratively dull, or take something that's bad writing, and try and apply these tools. Because there's a lot more room for you to be playful. Whereas something like BioShock that knows what it's doing and does it very well, I think you kind of fit in a place that the author already wants you to fit into. Whereas here, Mario as our 21st century Mickey Mouse did not intend to be read like this. And I think there's actually a lot larger play space there because of that.
Play space for you.
Yes, exactly. Right, and I mean that, to me, obviously as someone who loves games and is getting a PhD in literature, this is a game to me, right? There's no, someone said to me earlier that literary analysis has to be very serious and that we shouldn't be having any fun. This is fun to me, specifically because it just flies in the face of what they intended, what game makers intended, and says, I don't care, I'm gonna make something that I find interesting here. Yeah.
Have you ever worked on a game?
That's such a good question, right? What am I doing talking about these things? No.
Do you think you'd be disappointed if you didn't?
Disappointed in what way?
Well, that the process was not everything you dreamt of when you read all these things all the game.
Ah, I see. No.
You're not afraid of making a game, though?
Oh, I mean, I would be afraid of, I think I'd make quite a bad game myself, because I think I'd be spending a lot of time thinking about these things. And I think that the people who make games are in some ways infinitely more interesting than I am. But it's my job to sit in a room and play a different kind of game, you know. No, I think my game would end up all muddled because I'd end up, you know, trying to incorporate Hamlet into Mario. I have no expectations that I would, you know, I'm better than game designers. I think you guys are awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sure. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, for people who actually make games. Yeah, I'd like to think so, in terms of, again, designing and incorporating details for people who read like me. And keeping in mind that while you produce a product, you also produce a work of art that somebody might approach this way. It's not to say that you need to have a system hidden in there about Hamlet, but give us details. You know, people respect what you make enough to do this kind of work. You know, reward us in some way and think about games in that light. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thanks. Thanks.